how all the brain nerves are divided and how you could explain them. That's no problem, we got you covered. We start with the video. And before we start, here's an overview of all the timestamps you will need to start with the whole thing. And here is our course. Our course is now available. You can get it on our website with the whole course for medical professionals with the brain nerves in mind. So here you get texts to understand, summarizing things for quick learning, and also you will get flashcards for practice with videos to repeat. So get started with the code WELCOME. You will get 20% off. Let's start with the video. And first we will look at how to divide the different brain nerves we got. So we will provide you with an overview of how to physically divide them. Therefore, you definitely know that they are nerves that are in communication with the brain and pass through the holes at the base of the skull in order to innervate the different structures. They innervate the head, neck, thoracic, and abdominal viscera. So there are 12 pairs of nerves symbolically expressed with Roman numerals. We will come to that later on. Therefore, you first have to divide them in three main categories. You have the sensitive or the sensory nerves, which are the olfactory, the optical, and the auditory nerves. The olfactory, optical, and auditory nerves are all with their real origin in the organs of parts of the body from which they receive their sensitivity. For example, the nose, the mouth, and so on. They relay in the ganglion and enter the brain mass. Overall, you have the motor nerves, which are the common oculomotor, the pathetic, the external oculomotor, the spinal, and the hypoglossal, which are kind of their real origin is in the brain mass. They go to the ganglia and reach the muscles they innervate. And then, last but not least, you have the mixed nerves, with trigeminal, the facial, the glossopharyngeal, and the vagus, which are kind of mixed because you can't really put them in one or the other category. So let's summarize. You have three different. So let's summarize that. You have three main categories you can divide the brain nerves in: the sensitive or the sensory nerves, which are the olfactory, the optical, and the auditory. Then you have the motor nerves, which are the common oculomotor, the pathetic, the external oculomotor, the spinal, and the hypoglossal. And then you have the mixed nerves, which are not really fitting in one of each categories. So you have like the trigeminal, the facial, the glossopharyngeal, and the vagus. And now let's start with all the brain nerves at a glance. So we will look at all different brain nerves, which are cranial nerves. We can consider a real or an apparent origin. Apparent origin typically is the site of emerge of the nerve through the brain mass, and then they have like the real origin, which is the site that gives rise to the nerve fibers that constitute with the nerve. But let's start with the first nerve. It's the olfactory nerve, which is its origin in the bipolar cells of the olfactory bulb, in the olfactory epithelium located in the superior turbinates of the nasal cavity. They pass through the cruciform plate and reach the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb is continuous with an olfactory band and is divided into two, medial and lateral. It has two destinations. To medial, it goes to the subcallosal and periolfactory area. To lateral, it reaches the unconscious in the hippocampal gyrus. Its main function is the smell. Its type of the fiber is merely sensitive. It should be noted that it is the only one that does not pass through the thalamus. So definitely keep that in mind when thinking about the olfactory nerve. The second one is the optic nerve. You definitely heard about the different ways it can origin, but it originates in the retinal ganglion cell layer. The axons of these cells meet and go backward from the optic nerve. 4 segments of this nerve are described in intraocular, intraorbital, intracanocular, and intracranial. Subsequently, it forms optic chiasm, optic tracts, and optic radiation. Its destination is the primary visual area in the occipital cortex. Its function is to allow vision. Obviously, its type of fiber is sensitive. It passes through the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus. So now you have the first thing which interacts with the thalamus in contrast to the olfactory nerve. Let's get started with the third nerve. There you have the oculomotor nerve, the oculomotor or common oculomotor nerve. It originates in the tegmentum of the mesencephalon. It has two nuclei, the main motor and the accessory parasympathetic, also known as Edinger-Westphal. It exits the midbrain through the anterior pontomesencephalic sulcus and heads to the sphenoid fissure where it enters the orbit. It has to be divided into two branches. Its destination are the superior branch, which innervates the superior rectus muscle and the levator palpebrae superiors, and the inferior branch, which innervates the internal rectus, inferior oblique, and inferior rectus. It also gives a branch to the ciliary ganglion with parasympathetic fibers to innervate the sphincter muscles of the iris and the cilia muscles. Its main function is thereby controlling the movement of the eyes. So you have the optic nerve, which main function is the vision, and then in contrast you have like the oculomotor nerve, which is mainly based on the movement of the eye. Superior, medial, inferior, supraexternal movement, raise the eyelid, contract the pupil, miosis, and accommodation, direct and consensual photomotor reflex. Its fiber is motor. So you see there are a lot of functions going on with the oculomotor nerve, but let's get started with the fourth one, which is a bit more easy. The pathetic or trochlear nerve, which is the fourth one. It originates in the tegmentum of the midbrain. It is the only cranial nerve that exits from the dorsal aspect of the midbrain. So definitely keep that in mind to see the differences between all these nerves. This nerve surrounds the cerebral pedunculus forward and enters the orbit through the sphenoid fissure. The destination is the superior oblique muscle of the eye. This nerve is in change of the inferior medial deviation of the eye. Then you have the fifth, which is a very important nerve, the trigeminal nerve. It is the largest cranial nerve and is a bit more complex since it has three branches, the ophthalmic, the maxillary, and the mandibular. It is conformed by four nuclei, one motor and three sensitive. And the trigeminal nerve has two nerve roots, one fine motor and one gross sensory. The sensory goes to the Gesser ganglion. First you have the ophthalmic, so V1 or fifth one, where the destination is to cross the sphenoid fissure to the orbit, and the function is nostril and skin of the nose, forehead, upper eyelid, lacrimal gland, as well as the sensory innervation. Then you have the second branch with the superior maxilla. The destination is to pass through the greater round hole to the pituomaxillary fossa. Then you have the function, which is sensory innervation of the cranial dura malar and temporal region, gingiva in molars, and the upper premolars, as well as the upper canyons and incisor lower eyelid, lower nasal mucosa, and the upper lip, as well as the palate. And then you have the last of these three, which is the mandibular. It exits through the foramen ovale to the zygomatic fossa, and the function is the sensitivity to the cranial dura mater, cheek mucosa, lower gums, sublingual and submaxillary glands, anterior 2/3 of the tongue, parietal gland, temporal region, and external auditory canal, and the temporal muscle motor masseter, internal as well as external pterygoid. And then we go on with the sixth nerve, which is the abducens or external oculomotor nerve. Its origin is the inferior tegmentum of the bridge at the level of the medullopontal sulcus, and then it passes through the cavernosus sinus and enters the orbit through the sphenoid fissure. Then you have the destination, which is the lateral rectus muscle of the eye, and its function is the lateral movement of the eye, whereby the fiber type is motor. And then we continue with the seventh nerve, which is the facial nerve. Again, a bit more complex than the others. It originates in the bridge at the level of the middle ponte sulcus. This nerve goes through the internal auditory canal, exits through the stylomastoid foramen and passes through the parotid gland. The destination is motor muscles of the face except for the masticate and the upper eyelid lift, and then you have the sensitive anterior 3/3 of the tongue, the skin on the back of the ear, an external auditory canal, and the lacrimal, sweet, sublingual, and submaxillary glands. Its functions are the movements of the facial muscles, the sensitivity of the anterior 2 and the 3rd of the tongue, ear, skin, and external auditory canal, as well as parasympathetic secretion of lacrimal, sweet, sublingual, and entsprechend submaxillary glands. Its fiber types are motor and sensory. And then we continue with the 8, which is the vestibulocochlear nerve, which nerve is also called statoacoustic or auditory and originates in the vestibule and cochlea of the auricular apparatus. It exits the petrosus region of the temporal bone until it reaches the middle pontus sulcus. The vestibulocochlear nerve destination is the bridge in the tegmentum, and its function is allowing balance and hearing. Fiber type, again, sensitive. And then the last of the glossopharyngeal nerve is the origin and destination, which emerges from the medulla oblongata and leaves the skull through the jugular foramen. Then you have the destination, which is the sternopharyngeal muscle and the parotid gland. The sensory origin is the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, the pharyngeal mucosa, the palatine tonsil, and the auditory tube and middle ear. The destination is once again the medulla oblongata. This nerve functions are swallowing, parotid secretion, the sensitivity of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, pharyngeal mucosa, palatine tonsil, auditory tube, and the middle ear. And then we continue with the last 3, which start with the 10th, which is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve originates in the medulla oblongata. It passes through the rear torn hole and descends through the neck together with the carotid and jugular veins. Its destination gives pharyngeal, laryngeal, esophageal, bronchial, sinus nodes, diaphragm fibers, which is phrenic nerve, then the stomach, intestines, kidneys, and liver. So a lot of functions going on there and a lot of connections to different organs, which are very important when you come to the brain nerves. The nerves function are the Austrian tube and middle ear, 1/3 post-taste, one of the tongue, swallowing muscles, and parasympathetic innervation, which fiber tube, which is again mixed motor and sensory. And then you have the spinal nerve. Its origin lies in the medulla oblongata, exiting through the rear torn hole. The spinal nerve target and are the external cleidomastoid and trapezius muscle. Their movement is being its function, fiber tip, again motoric. And then we continue with the last of the 12 brain nerve at a glance, the hypoglossal nerve, which originates in the medulla oblongata, leaving the skull through the hypoglossal canal. Its destination are the muscles of the tongue and the movements of the extrinsic muscles of the tongue to allow speech are this nerve's function. The fiber tip is motoric. And that's all on our course of the brain nerves. I hope you got it. If so, let's leave a subscription for us and like on this video. And once again, we remind you, our course is now available with the brain nerves for medical professionals, explained with text summaries as well as flashcards, just everything at a glance. And with the code WELCOME, you will get 20% off everything. So let's look at our shop and see you next time. Goodbye.